on the 0 Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow, and joining me once again, I always look forward very much to our conversations, is Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff is an economist, economic historian, professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, visiting professor at New York University, and the host of Economic Update on Free Speech TV, the author of a number of books, including The Sickness is the System. I believe I've gotten all the highlights. And so first of all, Richard Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, RJ. I'm very glad to be here.
Well, we're very glad to have you. And you know what's been on my mind lately, because it's been on everybody's mind, because we've been saturated with this stuff, is so-called artificial intelligence in general and Chat GPT, this human language application in particular. So I was hoping we could talk about that a little bit with the with this kind of comment to begin with, that for 30 years now I've argued against the term artificial intelligence because I don't think that's what it is. I think it's data manipulation. But that said, that seems to be the term of art. So if I assume you've been reading all that as much as I have or more, right?
Yes, if there's no way to escape it.
Yes, it is ubiquitous. And I should, first of all, tell you that, have you played with Chat GPT at all?
No, it's on my to-do list, but my suspicions, which are, I'm sure, a little bit like yours, or maybe a lot like yours, probably make me a little biased against wading my way through the hype to get at what it actually is. You know,
right.
If you look at the history of capitalism, the last 3 or 4 centuries that we've had it, every technological breakthrough is always celebrated by large numbers of people as though it were a world transforming. All the past is wiped away and the future is, whether it's mechanical looms back in the 18th century, or atomic energy, or electricity, or modern chemistry, or any of the others, a tremendous hoopla that you have to kind of live through before you can settle down and try to figure out what this does. And even then, what has happened is that it's been adopted by a whole bunch of industries. The hyping has enabled those industries to get subsidies, to get special passes in the law that
right.
have existed before. So now they become defenders of the hype because their own business model depends on it. Then there are, on the other side, those being destroyed by it, who are desperately trying to figure out if they can stop it, or if they can't stop it, limit it, or if they can't limit it, begin to take advantage themselves of it. And then sometimes they move over to the cheerleading side. But it is so intertwined with profit-driven business that getting a reasonable citizen's take on it is almost impossible.
No, I think that's a great point. And I used to say, remember 20 years ago or so, they used to say, oh, the internet is as big a revolution in human communication as the printing press. And I remember saying, but when the printing press was invented, you didn't have obnoxious 25-year-old billionaires running around talking about how they were disrupting the scribe industry. You just had printing presses. I guess what that gets me to is the hype is definitely an element of it, but one of Chat GPT fascinates me in a couple ways. Not necessarily because it's inherently so wonderful. It's certainly not intelligence, but because, and I'm working on an article about this because I think it is almost the most unavoidably socialist in construction, if not in economic terms, development I can think of in technological history. It literally takes everybody's words and runs them through, its proverbial meat grinder. And the words that it gives back to us are not its words. They're not its inventor's words. They're the words of everybody. So in a just society, whatever profit is to be reaped should also go to everybody. I don't know. So I'm trying to work that up, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if I'm confident of anything, I am confident that as long as we have a capitalist system that collects the labor, the output, the productivity, the creativity of millions of people here in this country, 325 million of us, and generates a mountain of profit, of excess beyond what's needed to reproduce ourselves, that capitalism will make sure that a tiny group of people dispense what Marx called the surplus, this extra we all produce over and above what our standard of living entails consuming. And that, can be thought of as the discretionary fund. Every worker really understands this, whether they can use the language or not. They understand that whatever the employer is paying them, the value of their labor to that employer is more than what they're being paid. And the difference is what the employer would like to call the profit that he, the employer, creates. He doesn't create it. He gets it. But the lovely inference he wants us to draw, that he gets it because he helps to produce it, is the same effort that the master makes when he says to the slave, you're not smart enough to produce things. You need a master. And therefore, it's legitimate for me to take this surplus because but for me, it wouldn't be there. Most capitalists believe that also. But even though when the masters were gone, the surplus kept being produced, and when the lords in feudalism were gone, the surplus that the serfs produced was still there. And I can assure every capitalist that if they disappear, the workers will be well equipped and well able to produce a surplus that they themselves will then decide how to use. But I know that the system that is as successful as capitalism has been, to grab this enormous surplus from the mass of people who've helped to produce it and deny those people any role in deciding what is done with the fruits of their own labor. I mean, any such society will be able to grab hold of artificial intelligence or whatever else you want to call it and make it serve profit because everything else has been done. I mean, and the mass of people, unless things change, will go along with it. They will be told a story that makes them accept. When I speak to workers and I say, do you understand that the job you have in this factory, this office, this store is part of what makes the store successful? Yes. Okay, so then the fruits of this enterprise are dependent on the people whose brains and muscles contribute to producing it. Is that right? Yes. So tell me, why is a board of directors that never sets foot in this place in the position of deciding what to do with a portion of what you and I have helped to produce here? I get from the workers that I speak to a kind of puppy dog stare. They understand what I've asked them. They know somewhere that the answer they're about to give is a kind of bullshit they've gotten from those people upstairs. They're now a little confused. And in that moment, of course, I leap, trying to make them understand that it is as illegitimate as I've just made it sound. And they ought to be very angry about it, which is why this kind of economics, because what I've just done is summarize a particular way of doing economics. That's why that's not taught in American schools. There's no mystery as to why, because if people understood it that way, they probably wouldn't tolerate it anywhere near the way they do now. So here's my bottom line fear. If it were used rationally, this invention, whatever you call it, like so many before it, the mechanical engine, the nuclear power, the whatever, it would be used for what the defenders often claim, to save human beings from boring drudgery, from labor that makes you into a robot or exhausts you, to free us in the literal term in its meaning. And we've been promised that technical breakthroughs are labor saving for the last 500 years. But human beings are working more hours and harder today than they did 500 years ago. With all the technology, something doesn't happen. Namely, that we work less hard, that we work fewer hours. It doesn't. And the reality is, and the explanation is simple. The technological breakthroughs are used to make more money. That's their purpose. And the people who run the society want to use the technical breakthroughs for that purpose. They have no profit to be earned by making less labor the rule in our society. They don't. Capitalists are trying as hard today to extend the length of the working day as they did back in the days of Charles Dickens or Emile Zola or any of the great writers of early capitalism. Now, have a different name for it. They don't call it the longer working day. They call it voluntary overtime or compulsory overtime. And they have been forced by labor unions to pay a bit more. But most employers understand, even if you pay more an hour, since it's the same worker who you have already paid all the benefits for, it's cheaper for the employer often to do that. It's just disgusting. It never stops. And that's my fear, that the art of AI, robots, computers, because that's really a very similar family of breakthroughs. That's how they have been used. Here's another way to get at it, RJ, because you reminded me of this with your mention of Elon Musk. Most people understand that in terms of the fossil fuel, the climate issues, and the waste of resources in general, moving people around the world by means of a private automobile, an individual vehicle, rather than a collective vehicle. By collective vehicle, I mean a railroad car, a bus, a van, anything that moves groups of people at a time. Everyone knows that if you moved groups of people, you would have much less fuel to burn, many fewer resources to use up. You would have fewer accidents because the roads would be opened up since they were built for individual cars. And you also would face the fact that the individual car is a colossal waste since it sits on the street or in the garage most of the time. It's a fantastically inefficient way. All right. So what we need under climate change pressures, what we need under running out of resources on this planet, what we need is a sustained move from the individual automobile to the collective mass transit. You could still have individual cars. We've already worked all that out. It's called rent-a-car. At the edge of every urban area, there's a garage. It maintains a group of cars in peak order all the time. If and when you actually need an individual car, you go there, you pick it up, you use it for the purpose of a vacation or moving something, and then you give it back so it can be used by others and so forth. So we know how to do it. Elon Musk didn't solve that problem at all. He ignored the problem. And by ignoring it, at the very least, he postponed solving it for N years, where N is an unknown number. Why? Because he refocused the capitalist world on the money that could be made by junking your gasoline car and replacing it with an individual electric car. You know, a person like that ought to be fined for wasting the human race's time. Instead, in this society, he's the richest man. I mean, he was, but he was for a while the richest man. He is so clumsy, so awkward, and so much the living proof that to be very rich and to be very smart have no relationship to one another. But put that aside. We are now embarking, and all the other automobile companies, GM, Ford, Toyota, they're all busy making electric cars because, of course, for them, the important thing is to keep the individual car because they can make a fortune off of that. They don't want collective, which is why we don't have it. But there's the perversion we could have had, we should have had. Collective transportation, develop beautiful buses. You know, the Europeans, I don't know if you've recently been on a first-rate European train. I mean,
I have, yeah.
It's completely different from here. It's comfortable. You know, at your seat, they will bring you a little tablecloth and deliver you a lovely lunch or dinner. It's a wholly different experience. The train goes much faster. I mean, we know what to do to make mass transit very efficient, very pleasant. Really, the Chinese, they're way ahead with their bullet trains that basically run all over their country. And they're showing us the way. So we have everything we need. Instead of it, we are going to keep producing those cars, keep cluttering the highways with them, keep injuring thousands of us as we go about our individual. I mean, is just the worst imaginable way. Capitalism's method of developing technology is a rigidly profit-driven system. And the worst of all are the ideologues who only point to whatever it is that system has allowed to be developed and never ask the question, what could we have had were a different logic driving our inventive juices?
Or even how could the inventions we have under this system be used differently, right? Because if you'll indulge me for a second, I did experiment with ChatGPT, and among the instructions requests I gave it was write a progressive radio host monologue, and I won't bore you with the entire thing, but it began, "Hello, fellow progressives, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, and as always, I'm fired up and ready to talk about the issues that matter to us." And then it talks about income inequality, economic justice, the rich keep getting richer, the 1%, but it doesn't have to be that way. And then it gives all the thing, you raise the minimum wage, strengthen labor unions, close tax loopholes, but we can't do it alone. tone. We need to come together and demand change from our elected representatives. And it goes on in that tone. And, I suppose a lot of people would be, in my position, would be upset to read this. On one level, I found it hilarious because it's, if automation can rid society of this trite bullshit, then, good for it. On one level, because a lot of rhetoric in the mainstream on all sides is trite. But the real point is, in this case, it's got transcripts of people like me and others, maybe more mainstream, but still, liberal or progressive. We created this, right? The software company is just processing it. So, and now what they're going to do with this, they're already begun doing it, is they're going to start to put people out of work with it. I'm not worried for myself because hopefully I'll stay one step ahead of the cliches, but that's my goal. But BuzzFeed News just announced it's going to start using this program to write some of its content. That just happened today. So what we're seeing is working people, broadly defined, creating content that is then used to put them out of work. So, and to further increase the concentration of wealth. And I think that's the cycle we're up against. I'm not sure how to reverse it.
Yeah, well, let me give you a couple of other examples. There's this congressman who lied his way into the Congress, and everybody's making fun of him these days. I see him, though, as just sort of the logical endpoint. Most of the characters there are lying, getting caught having made up schools you never attended as though you did, and money you've earned, and jobs you've held. And he just threw all the constraints away and just seems to be making it up as he goes. I suppose he was inspired by Trump, who often appears to be kind of doing it on his feet as he goes. Students are asked to write papers. Well, now, for many years, this has been circumvented by the students who didn't have the time or the interest or the ability by getting another student to write the paper for you and paying them. Then we had services. There were services easy to find who would write a paper for you of any kind that you wanted. And now you're going to have this automation, right, making it easier, quicker, cheaper to get all of this done. Either hand it in yourself and hope that 10 other people in the class didn't do the same thing and the professor begins to notice something, or adjust it a little bit yourself. The logic of a rational system would have us ask, here is something we're on the cusp of it. We can do this. We can go to a chat thing like this.
Right.
Here are some of the benefits that we could get. Here are some of the defects, some of the bad outcomes of all of this. And do the same thing. Here's one way to institute this. Here's another way. This one makes more profit, but has these social costs. This one makes less profit, but has these social benefits. Okay, with all of that information, let's have a discussion and a debate. Where do we want to put our efforts in developing the technology further? That would be the rational. Nothing like that happens.
Right.
The overwhelming bulk of stuff comes from the big corporations, filtered through their grant-giving agencies, their influence on the government. It's been this way for 400 years, and the only defense that my colleagues ever give me is, see, I have this cell phone. Isn't that wonderful? And I try to tell them, in ancient Egypt, they said, see, I have and held something up. Every society develops technology, every one we've ever seen. And you can hold up something that will be impressive to people because it's more advanced over something their parents had or their grandparents had and that they remember. This is an exercise for morons. The question is not, this is not a proof of anything, because the issue is, okay, it took you these years and these resources to make that breakthrough. You could have done what? That's the question. So you make a rash. Otherwise, you never change from what you've done. Since I have 2 bushels more of corn this year than last year, what do I need to worry? And we live like that for 4 centuries until someone understands if you shovel the manure from the cow onto the field, where did that come from? How did you? It is a comment on the mentality that capitalism constricts in order to impose this channel. Do it if it's profitable, don't do it if it isn't. So we are now going through an immense expense to produce individual electric automobiles to replace the individual gasoline power. Really, one sits in stupefaction at such behavior.
And, and in the case of any of this technology, the difference between an electric car and something like this chat software is, the cost of the individual production of a car is enormous, including in environmental terms, carbon terms, and so on. Whereas the cost of producing, something, a fake monologue is zero, basically, once the work has been done. You are a longtime advocate and spokesperson for Democracy at Work, democracyatwork.info website and all that. And to me, this is the ultimate example of what democracy at work should be, because each of us, every one of us, including you and I speaking now, I suspect, are going into a database and are feeding and generating this resource that, instead of being used to benefit the people whose output is producing it, is going to be used, I think, to drive wages down, to put people out of work, to put reporters out of work, to put clerks out of work. It's kind of an endless cycle in a sense. But I will tell you that I saw that somebody online had it write their own obituary. So I must confess I did that. And it begins with great sadness. We announce the passing of RJ was a brilliant and passionate writer, activist, and advocate for social justice. He was known for his incisive commentary and fearless activism. All I said was write an obituary for Richard Eskow, and he touched the lives of many with his words and actions. Uncanny, right? So accurate. But I'm joking. But it then goes on to get some facts wrong, which just goes to show you that, details are not the strong suit of any of this. You mentioned George Santos, the, fictional. It seems to me accuracy is not as valued as it should be. I think there are 2 threats posed by this. One is psychological to people in a professional class who may feel that their value is in their written or verbal output, which I would argue is not where human value comes from. But then, of course, the assault on jobs. I just wonder, if we really radically revised our take on how to use technology. You remember the phrase that was in vogue a few years ago? I haven't heard it in a while, but in Britain in particular, the young left was using the phrase fully automated luxury communism. Did you ever come across that?
No, but I know the strain of thought.
The concept. Yeah, it's basically another guy wrote a book called Trekonomics, which is the economics of Star Trek. And if you had those replicators where you could just say, give me a potted plant, and then a potted plant appears, what would the economy look like? And I'm pretty sure I wouldn't want to become a yeoman on a ship, if I could just ask for anything I want and get it. Obviously, it's utopian beyond belief, but it seems to me there should be another way to employ, whether it's electric vehicles, as you say, mass transit vehicles, whether it's this kind of productive technology. There should be a way to employ technology through collective decision making for the collective good that's radically different than what we've got today, shouldn't there?
Yep. Look, and let me push this a little bit with you if I can. The history of England is often written. In the 18th century, it was the struggle for the 12-hour day. In the 19th century, it was the struggle for the 10-hour day. And then it became, towards the end of the 19th century, the struggle for the 8-hour day. In every one of those struggles, the employer class, the capitalists, fought like crazy not to allow the working day to be shortened. And in every case, they prevailed for decades until they were defeated. And then the day was shortened. May Day, that holiday that the working class celebrates around the world, begins in Haymarket Square in Chicago with a rally for the 8-hour day. I mean, it's woven into our history. And then it stops. But of course, there's no reason for it to stop. The same logic that people said, I don't want to work all day for the boss, then go to sleep so I can do it again tomorrow. I want what the Germans recently have called work-life balance, right? Okay, but if you ask workers, would you like the working day to be 6 hours or 4 hours? The answer is yes. I could be with my family. I could develop interests. I could. And I said, suppose I offered you the same wage, but for half the time. Would you be interested in that? They look at me as if I'm a lunatic. The answer is so obviously yes, 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 please. Now, let me give you an example, simple example. A factory. A new machine becomes available that's twice as productive as the old machine. So in the old factory, you got 100 workers working with the old machines, producing output. New machine replaces the old machine, and the employer does what? The employer fires half of the workers. Why? Because with 50 workers on the new machine, he can make exactly as many whatevers as he did before. And he will sell the same number of things, therefore. He will not change the price. Let's make our story simple. So he'll get the same revenue, but he's very happy because he doesn't have to take the revenue and pay the 50 workers he fired. He only has to pay, and let's assume everybody's wage is the same. His profit goes up because the money he doesn't pay in wages to the 50 he doesn't need anymore that he fired, he keeps out of the revenue. So his profit has ballooned. He is as happy as we can. So here's a new technology installed because it's profitable. Okay, now let me explain. And anyone who wants to follow this, take a pencil, do the little arithmetic. You'll see it's all correct. Here's the alternative. The employer, let's assume, is no longer a capitalist, but just magically it's a worker co-op. They learn about the new machine, the same one I described a couple of minutes ago, and they come up with a brilliant idea. We're not going to fire anyone because that's not what we believe in. We're going to say everybody works 4 hours a day instead of 8. Why? Because with the new machine, working 4 hours a day, we can produce exactly as many whatevers as we did before. We will sell them at the same price and we'll get the same revenue. And we will divide it between the employer and the employee, or in this case, we'll take it ourselves. Everybody has the same. Even the employer will have the same profits because he pays the same wages, he gets the same revenue, and the difference is basically his profit. And what you have done, you've not damaged the profit of the capitalist, but you've transformed the lives of the employees who have just now won a 4-hour workday and will be able to do. Now, I ask you, in a democratic mentality, shouldn't you use the second method because it helps way more people than the first one? The first one is technology boosting profits, and the second one is technology transforming the lives of a large number of people. I can't lose that one. And it's an illustration to people letting technology be imprisoned in a profit-driven system is self-destructive to the human race.
And the future you describe, it sounds radical today, but that's a future we expected in the 60s when I was a little precocious science nerd thinking about the future, or just watching the Jetsons, which I mention every week, that George Jetson worked 2 hours a week at Spacely Sprockets and made enough to support a family of 4, buy a flying saucer car and a robot maid. And that was just the given assumption, I suppose, because workers were more organized than now, that automation was going to lead to this. The big concern, you'll remember, was what will people do with all their spare time? So we've got to figure out how to get that momentum going again, don't we?
Yeah, but I think we're doing. I think trying to get people to see the gap between what they have and what they could have, and then to ask the question, why does that gap persist, is our only way forward. Let me leave you with 2 thoughts about that, based on things happening today. Over the last week, once again, I've been blown away by that part of my family that is French. Over the last week, 2 million French people went into the streets of France in every village, city, and town, blocking the roads, stopping everything from going on. Why? Because the president of that country, a one with lower popularity thing than Biden has, lower than Trump has, a guy that the French people rightly abhor. He has decided, because he's already hated, to suck up even more to the the French capitalist class by proposing that the age of retirement, when you qualify for the very generous pension that the French give, should be raised from its current 62 years of age to 64. Mind you, those are years sooner than you can do that here in the United States. And the French people said, that ain't going to happen. Which, by the way, this has happened now 4 or 5 times in the last 15 years. Each time proposed by the government, each time opposed by the mass of people, each time the mass of people perseveres. We'll see how it goes this time. But that's what we have to do. We have to get to the point where people are able to say, this is crazy. We did not struggle all our lives. For 300 years, our forefathers and foremothers went out to fight for a better life, to be able to retire at 62, when you have some life left and don't have to do the daily drudgery. When your leaving opens a space for young people who need it to start or raise a family. It's all of the things. You're not taking that away from us. You're not. We don't gonna let you. I find that extraordinary. I find that that's the goal. Even if they lose, they all understand. Those 2 million people and the many millions more who agree with them. By the way, the polls are overwhelming. 60 to 65% against the government. Week after week. So no one should have any mistake. This mentality is a win, no matter what the outcome is on this particular issue at this particular time. Even if the government wins, it will be so embittering and so angering that it will develop the opposition that has happened in the past over and over. And here's the second one. Some of my friends, political friends, are taken in, I think, by the following argument that you're going to be hearing more and more. Over the last 3 centuries, the human condition, at least for Western Europe, North America, and Japan, has been improved.
Yes.
We live longer, our toilets work better, all of that. Isn't capitalism wonderful? Right? And when I hear that, it's all I can do to hold on to my chair and not get up and do something silly to the person out of whose mouth this junk has arisen. And so I begin a litany and I explain to them every single advance that you just listed and many more that I could list exists only despite the rigid opposition of the capitalist class at every point. They wanted a 12-hour day. They didn't give us an 8-hour day. They didn't give us pensions or bathroom breaks or anything. You are a hustler of the worst sort. You fight against something, you postpone, you delay, you block the advance of human society. And then when you're defeated, finally, you turn around and, like Mao said, you make a good thing out of a bad thing. You take the fact that you lost, and we don't have a 12-hour day, we don't have a 10-hour day, we have an 8-hour day, and you pretend that you're gifting this achievement. It takes the concept of chutzpah or whatever word whatever language you like, the nerve of the capitalist defender to talk like that is a sign that you don't have the consciousness among your people that you need to have. Otherwise, they would laugh that noise out of the room.
So our mission is to raise that consciousness, as we used to say. And Richard Wolff, you have been doing a wonderful job of that for many years now. So thank you for that. And as always, thank you for the conversation and thank you for coming on the program.
My pleasure, RJ. We really do good stuff here. We ought to bottle it and sell it out in the world and hope that people will enjoy taking it in, which I think they do. So I look forward to the next time we do this.
As do I. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.